because of background and so on, could just plan on living a very mediocre life, probably end up into very free and wild life. I was relegated to be a chip off the old block. There were too many factors involved to make it otherwise. I remember as a new Christian, I really wasn't very old in the Lord and didn't know much. And for some reason I don't yet understand, a fellow asked me to speak to a group of 8, 9, and 10-year-old boys. And unfortunately, he didn't give me much guidance or help. He just said, we have these kids getting together, and I'd like you to maybe come and talk to the kids. I was in a state of panic, I looked at this big old fat book, and I thought, where do you find something to tell kids? And I remembered a story about Job somewhere. I heard about this guy that had all these boils, and I didn't know much. I thought that might be a fun story to talk about. I had no idea what point there was to this story, but I remember this story. And I looked all over, and I made an amazing discovery. The story of Job is in the book of Job. And I started reading Job chapter 1 and verse 1 to find this story that I heard about the boils. I had 4 weeks to get ready. And being a typical young, undisciplined guy, I wasn't spending a lot of time in preparation, just a little bit here and there, and I was going very slowly through the book of Job. And about 3 days ahead of time, I'm wondering, where's this story they've been telling us that's in this book? I was reading these long dialogues about different characters talking back and forth, and this was an awfully long book. I thought, I'm not even going to get through the book once by the time I'm ready to talk. And the night came to speak to these kids, and there were about 90 of them at this club. And I was sitting up front, and I was just totally panicked. And I thought, this is crazy. Why did they ask me? I'm not the type. I was, believe it or not, a very introverted person at that time. And this is terrible. I can't do this. While I'm sitting there, looking out over this mass of humanity, I see the back door open, and across the back of the room come 6 adults. And I asked this fellow next to me, who was a leader for this group, who are those men? He said, those are some visiting pastors. They've come to see our youth work. Oh. Man, I'll tell you, my mind just went, phew. Oh. And I got up, and they had given me 15 minutes to do my little thing. I was through in less than 5. I didn't know what else to say. I don't know what I said either. I know the word Job came in there somewhere. I really just got up there and said a few things, and I sat down. Just totally numb, paralyzed, confused. And the director then went on to amplify for 10 minutes and apply, and he took care of it. I left that room convinced they would never con me into that thing again. I said, boy, this is ridiculous, Take a guy like me and try and get me to do something like that. And that was one thing I wrote off. Never again will I speak in front of a group of people. Crazy, If God had ever given me a flash of the future, I would have gone into hiding. Jonah would have looked like an amateur compared to me. I look back and I say, I don't understand it. But at a point in time, I can recall getting into Romans, the 6th chapter. And it hit me one time. Though in my heart for a long time now as a Christian, I've been saying, God, I want to count for you. It wasn't happening. And one time I was telling the Lord again, Lord, here I am. I want to serve you. And I'm reading these verses, and it says, consider yourselves to be dead to sin and alive to God. And right while I'm telling the Lord, I want to serve you, but I know what's going to happen. Lord, I really can't live this life. I really can't change. And I know, Lord, after this promise I make to you, just like all the other promises, I'm going to be back in the same routine in 2 days. But anyhow, here I am, Lord. You know what I was doing? I was presenting myself before the Lord as dead to him and alive to sin. Just the opposite of what God was asking me to do. And what I was doing was very natural based on the evidence that I was looking at. And it hit me, hey, you know, I was trying to understand this chapter. I thought, how can this be? I don't understand this. I actually did this. I tried to picture the cross. And I thought, now how could I be on the cross with Jesus? It says my old self was crucified with him. And I was trying to figure how this could be. I was trying to analyze the mechanics. And I thought, was I somehow up there in some mystical way, a flash of the future, and I was up on the cross with Christ? I was trying to figure out how this chapter could be, how God could have done this. And God said to me finally, hey, I am not asking you to understand this. I'm asking you to believe it. I'm asking you to take into account that you're free from the power of sin. I haven't asked you to figure out how I did it. I'm asking you to believe something, not understand something. I'm asking you to believe simply because I told you so, that you are free from that old boss, and you are alive to me. You are now related to me, and I'm the authority in your life, and you can respond to me. You're free. I've done it. And amazingly, as I've begun to consider that a fact and to take that into account, God's been changing my life. It's been happening. Not overnight. In fact, next week we're going to get into verse 14. God gives us a flat, outright promise in 14. And for some of you that are having trouble believing it, having doubts about whether this can be, God's just going to make you a flat statement in verse 14. Sin shall not be master over you, for you are not under law but grace. Let me speak for a moment to some of you seminarians. You know, in a lot of ways, the lives of the students in our fellowship here are different than those of you that are not in school. In a lot of ways, are they alike? Now, very often we don't know that, but it's true. And I know for a fact that the average seminarian has a hard time anticipating graduation, very often because of problems in his own life. Not things that he's going around announcing publicly, but very often a seminary student comes to seminary because he has a heart for God, but he knows he's not what he should be, and he's hoping seminary is going to help him. He's not coming as a finished product just to get a little wax put on him, a little polish. In the same way that, they say that most psychiatrists enter their training, major in psychology and psychiatry, because they're looking for answers for their own problems. I personally think that a high percentage of seminary students are doing the same thing. It's not that they're being phony. They mean business. And they're willing to quit a job, a good-paying job, move their family, live under lousy financial situation, eating beans and rice, 4 years, pressures in the family life that they wouldn't have to have because they mean business. And I want to tell you something. I don't care what your experience has been. I don't care how you anticipate the ministry, what your negative feelings are about you counting for God. This chapter tells you it's all good up ahead. It's all hope. You got no reason to be discouraged. Your problem is not yourself. Your problem is unbelief. And we need to go back on truths like these and be re-reminded and re-believe, if you want to put it that way. Take a step of faith again and say, God, I've gotten back into living as though I'm not free from the power of sin. But God, I'm going to, again, take you at your word. And God, I'm presenting myself to you as available, as alive to you. And I thank you, Lord, I'm free from the power of sin. So, God has said we're free from the power of sin, but he's telling us to do two things. Take it into account in our day-to-day lives and present ourselves to him as alive, ready to go. Bow, if you will, in prayer. I don't know, for those of you who are not only Christians, but Christians who have desired real change in your life, are having some real problems with a particular area of your life. It might be your attitudes, it might be your feelings, your emotions, your appetites. It might be an area that just has got you all snarled up. Based on what God said here, I'd like you to do something just now. And that's say thank you to the Lord that he's freed you from that thing. Right now, say thank you to him that he's taken the authority away, that you don't have to continue responding. And secondly, tell God you're available right now for whatever he's got for you to do. That tough thing that's been such an obstacle in your life for so long. That thing you've been stumbling all over. Perhaps God might just lay in your heart right now one step you could take. Like this football player, complimenting his wife at one meal. That was a real step for him. Perhaps there's a step God would have you take. It'd be a step of faith. You're going to do it taking into account what God said. Present yourselves to him as one who's available and able to respond because you've been freed from all that you were. Lord, I pray that by your Spirit you would continue to burn this truth in our lives this next week and these days ahead. That God, we might just take into account in our lives the truth that you've announced to us here. That we are free from that old boss. That God, you knew all that we were and were going to be. And we are now, Father, your slaves, your children, related to you because of what Christ did for us. Lord, enable some here this morning to make some real steps of progress this next week. By faith to step out and believe you, to enable them to do the thing that you've been talking about so long. Father, I pray that somehow in all of us as a whole, as a church, that you will so work in our church, in our fellowship, that God will begin to demonstrate to the world that you're alive, that your word is true. That God, they're going to have trouble spotting our personality types because they're beginning to see your Son. God, give us a heart of love and compassion for one another, that we might have a part in one another's lives to bring this result about. God, I'm believing you to do this, to take your word and apply it to our lives. For Jesus' sake.